It's definitely a doomsday death cult. We're very encouraged to go to funerals all of the time, open casket funerals, death, 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 death. Jesus is probably coming back tomorrow. Life is completely meaningless. It's short, it's fleeting.
It's only the afterlife.
It's only the afterlife that's important.
What about getting out? Your family's still involved and you love your parents, and yet you rejected this. So you were able to walk this world where not rejecting them, but rejecting this belief system.
This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not a replacement for professional therapy or treatment. Please understand that we mostly avoid what might be unnecessarily triggering content, but this is a real show about the reality of eating disorders and recovery. So there is a chance something might be personally triggering. If you're struggling, please reach out to a qualified provider for support. You can also check our resource list.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Becoming Recovered, Body and Soul. I'm just going to dive right in today with a quote, and then we're going to talk about why I picked that quote. So here we go. For many women, the relentless quest to be thinner has many features of traditional religions. For example, beliefs, myths, images, rituals, codes, all encouraging the pursuit of thinness and well-being through weight loss. Now, that's a quote by Michelle Lewicka in a book she wrote called The Religion of Thinness. And in fact, today, what we're going to talk about is the similarities between being caught up in an eating disorder, which is a lot like being trapped in a religious cult. And I'm going to be talking with someone today who's experienced and recovered from both. I want to be clear at the outset that I don't want to diminish and the differences between cults and eating disorders. I don't want to diminish the powers and the danger that some serious cults out there can inflict on people. And I don't want to diminish the complexity of eating disorders. There are biological, psychological, social illness. But that said, the commonalities between being trapped in an eating disorder and trapped in a cult are really worth us taking a deep dive and looking further into. I've been interested in this topic for many years. In fact, 15 years into my private practice, I started collecting all these things that clients were telling me, coming in day after day, hour after hour, about the rules they had to follow, about the sacrificing they had to do, about the shame they had if they didn't follow their rituals or participate in the dogma of weight loss and diet culture. And I decided at one point, I'm going to put together a list. And it made sense to me because it sounded like such religious dogma. It made sense to me to call it the Thin Commandments. And I published that in one of my first books called Your Dieting Daughter. Now, interestingly enough, I'm not even going to list what those Thin Commandments are, because what happened is, a la the internet, someone picked it up and started posting it as ways of thinspiration, ways to be better at having your eating disorder. So I was horrified and got them to take it off through a series of attorneys and all that. So I'm not actually going to publish, provide that list for people or put it up on the screen or talk about that today. Oops. Got some notes here. I'm not the first person who has been interested in this topic. There are a few authors I just want to mention. I'm not going to go into detail. I want to get to our guest. I'm very excited about this guest today, but a few authors that I think deserve some credit for also having written about this topic. One of my favorite authors and one of my favorite books, Appetites, written by Caroline Knapp. Actually, this is the only book I have ever read from cover to cover, picked it up and read it again from cover to cover immediately afterwards, because she talks a lot about women's desire and appetite and how it is shamed, and the cult-like quality of living in a culture that treats hunger like weakness and self-denial as a virtue. Many people know Janine Roth's books, one of them, Women, Food, and God. And getting an identity from having an eating disorder and getting an identity from being in a cult is something that we're going to talk about today. So, okay, no more delay. My guest today is Meagan Elizabeth.
Hi.
A former client of mine who has had firsthand experience of getting herself out of both an eating disorder and a cult. Welcome, Meagan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you had me on your podcast called Trust Me, all about cults. So
exactly. Fair is fair.
Yeah, fair is fair. So you recovered from both, and you've studied cults, interviewed a lot of people in cults. I think you know way more about cults than I do, except for maybe the eating disorder version of that. So how can you define a cult? Because I think it'll help people if we talk about the definition of a cult. I think it will help people understand why we're even bringing this topic up.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people really like Steve Hassan's definition of a cult, which is bite and its behavior, information. I always forget the T, and then I think it's thoughts and then emotions. So BITE, controlling controlling all of those things. Of course, immediately the similarities between an eating disorder appear. But I also, in my own Meagan way, just kind of think of it as a cult as something of like 98% of the people in your life are like, this is insane. And then you find maybe a small group of people, maybe in the pro-Anna community for an eating disorder or in the same cult as you, who are like, this is really smart. And that's kind of one of the first things that I look for in a high control cultish group.
Well, it's interesting because when I looked up the definition, I mean, one of the things that they talk about is that it's a rather small group. So what you said about most of the people are going to say, what are you doing?
Yes.
Right? But in that small group, there's practices and beliefs that other people might consider sinister, damaging, restricting your life, not expanding your life. You know?
Yes. And those groups are going to give you very, like, contrary to what you would think, very intense feelings of being high, like they're going to make you feel good, at least at first.
Good.
Exactly. Yeah. So getting through to somebody and being like, this is actually bad, it's very complicated because they're like, I've never felt better. So what are you talking about? You know?
Yeah. And that's why when I was on Trust Me, that's why I talked about you can't just say, stop it.
No, you can't.
I mean, you have to understand how the person got connected and pulled in and what it was providing for the person that they couldn't provide for themselves. And what was it about them that got them so entrapped, or I call it brain hijacked, you know?
Yes.
So I want you to talk about when you first realized that they were the same. And then I want to go back to the focus of eating disorder and talk a little bit about your own eating disorder, how you found me, and then we'll get into some questions about that.
Yeah, I think it took me a really long time to realize that they were the same. On Trust Me, we interview survivors. My co-host and I are both survivors of cults. And just slowly, as people started speaking and as I started thinking about survivors I knew or people still in cults, I realized that a lot of them had eating disorders, especially if they were women. You know, I mean, I guess that's kind of might not be true. The men might just not be talking about it as much. But the women pretty much all seem to have eating disorders. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. So the correlation came first. And then I started realizing, well, they're not just correlated, they're similar. Both could be considered a high control group that are giving the person a false sense of control.
So would you tell me a little bit more about the cult your parents were in, the cult you grew up in?
Yeah.
So listeners will kind of understand that a little bit better.
Yeah. So I'm fourth generation on both sides of my family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty embedded. Growing up, it didn't have a name. It was called the Church with No Name. Now that there's a lot of exposure coming out about it, people are calling it the 2 by 2s, like the number 2 times 2, because they send their ministers out 2 by 2 and they don't have homes and they stay with the congregants. So think the Catholic Church, but the preachers are staying with you and you can.
There's no church, there's no building.
There's no building.
They go, okay.
Yeah, we meet in homes. As a child,
I used to, as a child, go to homes.
Yes, most often it was our home. And, you know, it's not that small, actually. It's rather large. They think probably there was like 50 to 70,000 people in it. It's
Oh, wow.
all over the world, very underground.
It's a shoot off of a Christian.
It's
but kind of
Christian. It's like,
extreme.
yeah, it's like this man, and he was a Scotsman, and like 1898,
I
like had a
remember seeing that.
manic episode, in my opinion, and got really focused on this verse in the Bible where Jesus was like, I send them 2 by 2, and they get rid of their possessions. And he just totally skipped over the part later where Jesus is like, now they come back and take up their swords and like blah, 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 blah. He just got fixated on that. They have to give up their possessions, go 2 by 2, live with people. And it got really strict. It didn't change from like the dress code or the thought code from an 1898. You know what I mean? So I looked kind of like an American Girl doll sometimes, going to like a school with normal children.
I mean, like a pilgrim?
Yeah, a little bit. I was serving a little bit of a pilgrim. My mom, who I love more than anyone, had the like very kind of fundamentalist Mormon bun, you know, like when you see the FLDS women with the.
Is there something about, you said something about, you told me before, you mentioned it earlier, I think, you can't cut your hair?
No, women should have hair to cover their head. So the Amish and Mennonite women take that as like women should have a hair covering. So that's why you see them with really long hair and then a little like bonnet often.
Yeah.
We didn't do the bonnet. We just had the super long hair. So I could sit on my hair, accidentally would all the time, and like snap my head back because I sat on my hair.
Well, when you were young watching this, you talked about it being, you felt it was, the world was scary and doom filled.
It's definitely a doomsday death cult. We're very encouraged to go to funerals all of the time, open casket funerals, death, 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 death. Jesus is probably coming back tomorrow. Life is completely meaningless. It's short. It's fleeting.
It's only the afterlife.
It's only the afterlife that's important. So like, meanwhile in my head, I'm like, then why do I have to go to school and learn math? Like, just let me.
You're already rebellious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a very death, end of world focused cult. And the man who started it 120 whatever years ago thought that the end of the world was coming, and he ended up dying like on the side of the street in Jerusalem, I think, screaming that the world was ending.
And are there doctrines that you read and scriptures that happen when you go to these meetings at people's houses?
Yeah, it's all old King James Bible. You know, if it was like a new King James or whatever they're called, that might be understandable. Like, it's very thee, thou. You're like, what am I reading? And I think it's designed that way for a purpose, and that we don't really know what the point is. The Bible to me is like, you know, you can feel how you want about it, and Jesus is cool, but like, I think it's a really boring, dark book filled with
being in that way of seeing it, you know, and you just take pieces of it. And I do see that happens sometimes. You take the pieces you like, you know?
Yeah.
But what about getting out? I mean, just say a little bit about, you know, your family's still involved and you love your parents, and yet you rejected this. So you were able to walk this world where not rejecting them,
yes,
but rejecting this belief system. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. And I think some people feel like they have to, and maybe some people do have to cut it off completely. But can you talk a little bit how you managed getting out and still having them?
Yeah. And this is maybe too particular to just my experience, but I realized something as you said that. Perhaps I would feel differently if my parents were first generation. If they chose this, maybe I would be like, what? But they didn't. They were indoctrinated.
From young kids themselves?
Yeah, from
fourth generation.
Yeah, so they were raised in it, and by a much stricter and more physical method than I was. So I don't really think of them as having much of a choice. And I'm willing to forgive that for a relationship with
them. You just don't discuss it?
No.
You discuss everything else, but you just don't discuss that.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky that we align on everything else. You know, so there's a lot to discuss. They politically align with me. They are my...
It's interesting how you can cut a piece of that out and still remain in a relationship. And I know you have friends who are still in their eating disorder, and I would think that's a little bit similar too.
Totally. Yeah, you're just
You have
kind
to
of
love
like,
them anyway, and
yeah, and
accept them anyway.
how are you going to ever be a safe place for them to leave if you're not in their life?
Yeah.
So if they're not currently hurting you, like if I were really triggered by a friend with an eating disorder, perhaps I wouldn't go spend time with them, but I'm not.
Yeah, and
I
you should
feel
say, I'm not going to have dinner with you.
right. We can, yeah, well, let's go somewhere and like, I was gonna say go for a walk, but that's a bad idea. But let's go to a Sephora, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
And that's just how I deal with it.
Was it hard when you first said, because sometimes it's that initial, I'm going to get out. Was that difficult? Did they try to beg you into staying?
So there's been no conversation. That's one of the odd parts of this particular religion is like nobody talks about anything. So I just kind of
stopped going.
And I came to Montenegro.
You made a new life here.
I made a new life here.
And that's one thing that because we had a transition house, you were able to leave the residential
Yes.
and go into a transition house with other women who were also creating new lives.
Yes.
New rules, new rituals. Remember, we talked about replacing it with something else.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And
so you created a new life.
I created a new life.
Went back and
never
just not talked about.
Yeah. And now I have a podcast that I speak openly about it. So, perhaps there will be a conversation in the future, because if you do Google 2x2, you will see that a lot of it is falling apart right now. And I do have hope that my parents will see the light. But again, when your generation's deep,
imagine interviewing them someday.
I try not to get my hopes up, but that would be so interesting.
That's pretty intense.
Mm-hmm.
But the beauty is loving them anyway. And you remember what I said about acceptance, like that's a thing that you knew about Montenegro, and the way that I think people get help is you got to accept people where they are. We can't change everything. So
yeah,
you don't feel like they're harming you now. So that's different.
Yeah. And I will add to that like the people who worked at Montenegro were very accepting of my parents as well. So
right.
Like if they weren't, I would have been very defensive and angry and not trusted anyone.
Yeah.
So it's
because we didn't need to change them for you to get better.
Right.
And that's really a big part about healing is people say, my parents did this and that and this and that. And I just say, okay, if your parents died tomorrow, does that mean you're doomed?
Right.
Because they want their parents to change, say they're sorry, make amends. And I understand the feeling, but the reality is if you hope for that and you don't get that, you're screwed. So you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
You have to find your way out. I mean, with help, but you know what I mean.
That's a great point.
But let's talk a little bit about your eating disorder, because you came to me for treatment for that. So that the listeners know, because what we want them to get out of this is ways to get out of it, how you can identify if this is you, and ways to help you get out. So talk a little bit about your symptoms, maybe some of your practices, not too much in the weeds about that, how you found me.
Yeah. So, I mean, my origin, my villainous eating disorders origin story started with, something sympathetic, which was just a lot of trauma. I was in a cult. I was always being around very doomsday thinking, the world's about to end. You might go to hell. The humans are inherently flawed. Just a very dark anti-life way of thinking, I would say. And that kind of slowly developed into an OCD that didn't expand into my eating until after I hit puberty. And after I hit puberty, I started overeating almost immediately. And then I went on a vacation to Germany, where I found the food to be really disgusting. And
okay, no insult to Germans.
No insults to German. But we went to some concentration camps. My parents wanted to show me just how dark, humanity could be. That ruined a girl's appetite for me.
Wow.
Yeah, I not only didn't like the food, but I didn't like humanity anymore. The spark for like eating some food was gone. And what happened was this very long 3-week trip, it's affected me to the point that when I came back to school, suddenly people were like, you look amazing. And they weren't really being mean to me because
there you go.
Exactly. I dressed differently.
The instant reward.
Yes. I had to look different because of this cult. And then like, I suddenly was getting positive reinforcement of like, oh, you're actually not like you're not bad. Is how I was taking it as a
Not
person.
bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're not bad as inside as a
And
person.
then it becomes as a person.
And
Not
exactly.
just your body, but it becomes about who you are.
So I noted that as one would, and my OCD just kind of organized itself immediately about, well, let's take this to the next level.
I know how to do this.
Yeah, I know how to do this. So I'd never weighed myself before it became 10 times a day, weighing, not just rules of exercising. I'd never been somebody who would exercise, rules about just like what was acceptable to eat calorie wise. And I very quickly lost an alarming amount of weight to a point that I remember like going down an escalator at Forever 21 once, and I saw my reflection in the mirror and I was like, that girl
Who is that?
needs some help. And then it clicked, oh, that's you. And my brain immediately was like, no, you need to lose a few pounds. And that was weird how quickly, and I noticed that was weird. Even though I was young, I was like, that's weird that you thought that girl was too thin and then you realized it was you and then you looked fat.
Everybody has a healthy self in there and an eating disorder self.
Yes.
You did see it. You got a glimpse that it was wrong. And I think most people, and we'll get to this, the way I think people heal is in us is a strong, healthy soul self in there.
Yes.
And to help people get out of these things, we have to strengthen that part of them.
Yes.
And it's that part of them that gets them up and out.
Yes.
And when I ask people sometimes, I get these moments where they saw it. They had a flicker. They realized that they had those two parts in there.
Once the flicker of the inner self comes on, you can't ever make it fully go away. You can really try to shut it up. But I knew something had pinpointed through that illusion a bit. So I did have that. And I'll just quickly move through, my process. I have a personality that's a bit more impulsive. I quickly learned like throwing up is way more my style. So bulimia became my go-to, and it just quickly spiraled deeply, deeply out of control.
Well, bulimia, that's a way to get so trapped because it's like easy. You can,
so much easier.
You can have the food and not the consequences from the food.
Totally. And
it's wow, I've discovered something.
And I could still be social. I had been so isolated with anorexia, and now I could still go out with people. My friends or my family have the food and then just be like, goodbye, get rid of it, and get the reward of people saying that I looked cute. And that the being cute was like my second cult, as we'll get to.
Okay. You've had a few. And that does speak to a personality that is vulnerable, And what you said about people, I think it's very interesting. And you're the one who pointed this out to me, that a lot of people who are in cult also have eating disorders, and a lot of cults also prescribe certain ways of eating and diets to people, which just feeds this whole circular process. So how did you actually, I owned and was running Montanito when I met you, when you came to treatment. How did that happen? How did you get there?
So I had a therapist named Beth McGilly. And
oh my God.
Yeah.
I forgot it was her.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a miracle. I do not use the term lightly, but I think maybe my school might have mentioned to my parents, like, she needs to, like, this isn't a good look for your daughter, because my parents are also extremely addicted to working out and eating healthy. And so they were like, you look great. You know what I mean? So
yeah. But by the way, that's another, when we look at all the influences and the risk factors, if parents are over focused on that, that can be another thing that sets it off.
And of course, I mean, they're in a high religious group. They're not drinking, they're not smoking, they're not gambling, they're not doing anything except getting their highs from going to the gym. Yeah. So I don't think that they particularly were like, get her some help. I think it was more outside forces that were like, she should probably talk to somebody. My dad was friends with Beth, and he was like, well, let's make an appointment with Beth. Like, my parents wanted me to be well. They just, I don't think, noticed that I wasn't. So I made an appointment with Beth. I started speaking to her. She's brilliant. And that was in high school. But it wasn't till maybe when I started completing college when she really realized I hadn't gotten any better. I'd gone to college away from the city where Beth practices. So I wasn't seeing her regularly. And she was like, I think you might need to think about when you graduate going to Montanito.
Can you talk a little bit about things that happened? Because I want listeners to get glimpses of things that happened that were kind of aha moments or eye openers, or the kind of help that you felt like, because you've told me I feel really lucky. I went there, and, some of the things that you saw or did that helped you to see out of it.
Immediately, just from being thrown into this Midwestern world of early 2000s media, couldn't have been darker. The magazines and stuff calling everybody fat, and everything was just so black and white, to moving to Malibu, where all of these wonderful women are like, pick a crystal and like you have a higher self. And I had never thought of God or higher self or higher, a higher being anything but somebody really mean who wanted to send me to hell. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say for the listeners, that's what I call the soul work. We don't just start on the symptoms and taking the eating disorder away. We try to replace it with what we call soul moments and soul work and reconnecting with the soul self. And so you have a reason of not why you got sick. Why you got sick is important, but people get stuck on that. What we tend to focus on more is how to get better and why you want to get better.
Yeah, because why would you want to get better if you're feeling better? If suddenly
I think it's working for
if it's working for you, and if you're having these peak experiences, the same as a cult, like, why would I leave this cult where I have a community, where I have my rituals, where I feel better? Like, well, you have to offer people something better. Always. You always have to offer them something better, or they can't see the light. So just being surrounded by people who were loving themselves, being surrounded by really healthy mindsets, being surrounded by beach walks and beauty. Like, not everybody has that opportunity, of course, but to build.
Oh, but I think that people can find it, like you can go
Totally.
to a park, you can go down the street. This is the thing. I don't want it to sound like people don't have access to that.
Yes.
But you find your people, and you find people that will listen to you. You find people that will be collaborative with you. I think I'm always talking about how treatment has to be collaborative. If we just bring somebody in and we say, okay, you were following all these rules, and now you're going to come in here and you're going to follow all of our rules.
Yeah.
Then, there's the whole thing about you don't develop your inner compass or your own North Star or whatever it is. And so that's what I think we need to give people. And I want people to find a therapist or a dietitian or even a coach, now that I'm training coaches, to help you be a role model. Like you said, you were around people who you liked and you thought maybe they have something that I want.
On Trust Me, the cult podcast that we do, we always encourage people who are leaving to find maybe a class that they have always wanted to learn something about,
Just start somewhere.
And maybe, it can be a community class. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but maybe if you can join more than one, just so it doesn't become a cult.
I know the story about you joining an acting class.
It turned into a cult. You know what I mean? So you just have to be careful that you're not making one person your leader. And you have a really great system. You had a really great system at Montanito where it was you and then a bunch of other women. So you never felt like one person's in charge, one person has all the answers, one person is this, and you could just kind of
good point.
Grab and take.
It was a philosophy more than a leadership. I mean, of course, I owned it and was, wrote the checks, But I think we had this philosophy of this healthy self, eating disorder self, and how do we strengthen the person's healthy self and get it back in control? And, I've talked a lot about my own story. I talk about it a lot, but I had my first aha moment like that, knowing that I had this other part of me, was driving to this. I talked about it on your podcast, driving to a Christmas party and with the critical eating disorder voice saying, you're not going to eat one thing when you go in there. You're not going to have one cookie. What are the rules? I have to follow self-discipline. And this other voice out of nowhere, but it was definitely me, said, that's easy for you. It's easy for you to go in there and restrict food. You've been doing that for what? 2 years now? Well, it'd be really hard just to go in there and to be able to have some cookies and be okay. And that was my first, who was it? But more so, I knew it was me. Yeah. That flicker that you talked about on the escalator. And that's what we try to blow on that flame and grow up in people.
Yes, that's such a beautiful point. And I think on the Trust Me podcast, I tried to press you on what was happening? And it's spontaneous, I think. And, you have to just listen when it happens.
I think we all have it. And I do think we all have it. One way I help people to access it, though, is to ask them, what would you tell a young child? Like if someone says, oh, I ate pizza and I just have to throw it up, I just freaked out that it's going to make me gain weight. I go, okay, you're babysitting a 7-year-old kid. Are you going to say, you better throw that up?
Right.
You had some pizza, you better throw that up. So far, I haven't had one client say, yeah, that's what I tell her.
Right.
So I think we have a healthy self in there, but it doesn't come out for us. It can come out for other people, which is why I like to run groups.
Exactly. Groups are one of the, most important things, because you can look at the person next to you and go, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous.
I'm doing that.
And it just comes alive because we're usually empathetic people. So for the person next to you, or for the girl on the escalator that I thought I was seeing, where I was like, well, that poor bitch needs to eat. And then I'm like, oh, that's me here. That's me. So yeah.
By the way, there's an interesting study where they wanted to talk about this research. What causes this body image perception thing that gets messed up? And they took pictures of people with anorexia. And they took a regular picture and then they took the head out of the shot. And when they showed the full picture to the person where they could see their face, they still did not see themselves as thin as they were. But when they took their head off and showed them the picture, they thought, God, that girl's skinny. So it's weird when we recognize it as ourselves and we're already trapped in the hijacked mindset or mindset.
Yes.
We just kind of go with what we already believe.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And there's something really interesting about that study when you try to help people understand.
It's so strange. It's almost like beyond what you can. It's just beyond what I can understand.
Grasp.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm always looking at what is the science behind this so I can show people, oh, I see. Here's the study. Yes, because some people would say, well, they don't want to believe when everyone else is saying you're too thin and they don't want to believe it. And I say, well, when I'm teaching therapists, for example, I'll say to therapists, well, of course, the person's going to believe what they see more than they're going to believe what you tell them. I have a phobia of snakes. If there is a snake in the room and I saw it, I'm going to believe it's there. If you tell me it's not there, I'm not really going to believe you unless you're someone I really trust. Mm-hmm. If you're someone I really trust, then I might go, is it? Well, why am I seeing it and you're not? And that's the thing about collaboration. And that's the thing about the therapeutic relationship. And that's the thing about having somebody to help you that you feel like you have an alliance with.
That is such a great point
about that.
Yeah.
And I think it would be the same as getting out of a cult.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the main things that we're, encouraging people to do as we learn more about cults is just really gently build trust with that person. And even politically right now, we are also on different sides of the sphere. And maybe you have a family member who's in a political mindset that you just cannot grasp. You think it's wrong. You think it's dangerous. Instead of just being like, I hate you, you're wrong, you're dangerous. Sometimes if they're not harmful to you, being like, so why do you think that? What's going on? What? And for right reasons, I'm sure. Sometimes you just can't speak to people who are spitting vitriol, but if you have it in you to connect to somebody and that, that example is extreme, but maybe they're in a religious cult and say, but why do y'all do that? And be like, oh, okay. And not that's stupid.
Well, the same thing as an
Yeah.
eating disorder. I mean, did I ever help anybody by telling them they were stupid?
Right. Yeah.
Or even, this is dangerous. That doesn't even work because the fear. Let's talk a bit about the similarities that I wrote down about being in a cult and being caught up in an eating disorder. So the first one is the belief system and the doctrine. And we already have talked about that one, I think. I talked about the 10 commandments, but we talked about there's rules, there's rituals, there's things you have to follow. And so many people who have eating disorders, recognize, that they're following them. In fact, there is a contagion that can happen when you're in a treatment center also. Oh, I didn't know about that rule. Oh, so there's that you have to be careful of, which is why it's about transparency and honesty and trust. So you're all talking about it. So I'd rather everybody talked about it. You want to share things? Share them in group here, because then we can talk about the antidote and how to care for that.
Yes.
But this other one, identity control. And how I relate to this one is I remember the really feeling identified with my eating disorder. When someone said, oh, you have to get rid of that. I thought, get rid of what?
Myself?
Me.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing right now. And I remember when I was trying to get better and I was at a girlfriend's house and she had some crackers and I took a bite of a cracker and then she said something like, oh, I didn't think you ate crackers. And I thought, oh yeah, that's right. I'm a person who doesn't eat crackers. Weird to be identified. I'm a person who, and I ask clients, that's one of assignments I give. I'm a person who, to get their rules out. I'm a person who doesn't eat after dark. I'm a person who only eats things that are in 2-digit numbers calorically. I'm a person who, to get out how they've become identified.
Yeah.
That you relate to that.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
And it must be like that, having an identity as a cult member, I would think.
Yeah. I'm a person. I mean, for my cult, growing up was like, I'm a person who doesn't have a television or media. I'm a person who wears different clothing. I'm a person who can't cut my hair. I'm a person who blah, da, 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 da. And my eating disorder towards the end was like, I'm a person who throws up everything I eat. No magic equation there, but identity completely.
And you don't want to lose that. I mean, that's the other thing on here. You get isolated from other friends. You get isolated sometimes even from your family members, because if someone challenges you on it, you can't be around them, or you're told not to be around them.
Yes.
Yes. And I think with eating disorders, I don't know if you're told not to be around them, but you don't want to hear what other people are saying when they're trying to get you to eat certain foods or gain weight or whatever.
No, that sick self, the unhealthy self is like so.
Don't listen to that.
Yeah, it's almost like disgusted by them, or like,
they just don't have control.
They don't have control. They don't get it. They're
envious of all that. That's why I don't use and didn't use from a long time ago. I don't call people anorexic or say person suffering from anorexia, because once someone starts saying, I am an anorexic, that is an identity. And I think we already have a problem with identity. And I try to teach that when I'm training therapists or coaches or whatever. Okay, fear and punishment, like what happens if you break the rules. You want to talk about that a minute? Eating disorder and cult.
Well, if you break the rules in a cult, you're immediately going to be sent in a bit of an OCD spiral where you double down and recommit to the rules. So you'll often see just a doubling down, a refresher, and
You mean people coming in to reinforce for you?
I mean, you're doing this yourself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
it's the backlash that happens
in your own mind.
Like for an eating disorder, if you ate ice cream or you ate, desserts, the backlash would be restricting even more.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
And that happens in a cult too.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, your mind just automatically has to equalize back to the equilibrium of whatever hijacked brain you're trying to maintain, So it's unconscious for the most part, I believe.
It just starts to happen. Well, this is the habitual nature of it over time. You may not even think that, I have to punish myself, or there's retribution. It just happens.
Completely.
And this is the thing why, sometimes people talk about being triggered. And if you're a therapist and you're working with somebody who's had an eating disorder for a long time, you say, well, what triggered that binge? And sometimes it's not triggered. I often say it's like waking up when you're an alcoholic and you just have a drink. You don't have to be triggered to have the drink.
Precisely.
Once it's so habitual, it's out of your awareness. And that's why I focus a lot on how to stop it rather than what triggered it. You're sinful, you're guilty, there's punishment.
I mean, I had to ground myself, like not grounding in the Carolyn way of like sitting on the beach with the crystal. I had to ground myself like a child from journaling for a really long time because my eating disorder really loved to talk to me through my own voice journaling. You absolute idiot. I cannot wait to watch you fail. Like you did it again.
Yeah.
I cannot even believe you have a slither of hope for yourself. This is so hilarious to watch you fail again and again. You are the biggest loser I've ever met.
I am so glad you brought that up because, as you know, I have people dialogue with their eating disorder self and their healthy self. And a lot of times people, when they're dialoguing, the eating disorder self says this and this and this, the healthy self comes back and doesn't sound like a healthy self. It sounds like a mean, it's like that. It says you did this and that and get out of my life. And I always say to them, if I talk to you like that, you wouldn't be around very long. So I have to go back to that thing. What would you say to someone else who did that?
Yep.
What would you say to someone else who you thought broke a rule?
Building up that non-toxic voice inside of your own head often does take somebody like you coming along to kind of stand in for it for a while.
Remember, I used to do role plays.
Yes.
Sometimes I go, oh, let me be your healthy self.
Yes.
I don't know where yours is right now.
Right. Right. And it takes a minute to come back online. And once it does, you really can feel when you're not in it and when you are.
That's why I have people write about it, because I think if we just dialogue, what happens is if you try to start to dialogue, what I find a lot of people do is they'll say something like, I'll ask them, well, what would you say to someone else? They go, yeah, I would say that to them, but I can't say it to myself. And I go, wait, right there. Just write what you would say. Don't stop yourself and say you won't apply it. Just write, because writing it actually helps train the healthy self to come out. But we'll stop ourselves. I did it too. I was like, yeah, well, I wouldn't tell her to do what I'm doing. But no, I got to get them to write it and then actually role play. Remember, I would move chairs and say, I'm going to sit over here. And you're going to do a show on that whole thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's a few more. This sort of charisma, what it offers in the beginning, the charisma of being thin, or the charisma of following certain charismatic leaders that have a sort of the voice of authority. You'll be safe with me.
For the moment that it works, it really hits. Of
course. Who doesn't want to be safe?
Oh, it's so nice. You're like,
oh, I found the way.
Yeah.
Someone is going to take care of me. It's an easy way to feel successful because they're going to show me. I always think it's weird when clients say, these are my safe foods, right? And I wrote about that 40 years ago. These are my safest safe foods. What do you mean safe? What's a food going to do? Clobber you over the head? In fact, I remember running family groups, putting a bunch of, I don't know if you ever were in one of these, put a bunch of food on the floor, then having family members come and say, okay, all the foods were numbered, like an apple was number 1 and a cookie was number 2, and there was a ton of food. And then I had the clients versus the families write down what words you associate with those foods. So you read a family members, and it was like, 1, I would take this apple and I would have that first. Then I would, with the lettuce, I would make some salad. Then I would have cookies afterwards. And the clients were like, scary, triggering, unhealthy, just these negative words associated with things. Or safe. Lettuce was safe.
I think that's like, I compare cults and eating disorders to an abusive relationship a lot, which
I understand that.
Because it love bombs you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like it really.
Yeah, because at first
it couldn't be better.
And also there's the promise of it's going to be better. I'm sorry. There's a lot of the person trying to say, oh, I'm sorry you got hurt, and we're going to fix
trauma bonding.
Better trauma bonding.
Yep.
And I remember, I think I talked about this in the podcast we did about taking a sheet of paper and having people write down all the reasons why an abused wife doesn't leave her husband. And it's like fear of the unknown, doesn't know if it's ever going to be better on the other side, thinks that it's not as bad, it's not that bad as I'm making it. I don't want to be hurt even worse. I'll be isolated. There's all these things. And then I take the top off and say, why don't you leave your eating disorder? It's the same.
Yeah.
It is the same. And it's good to point that out. I'm hoping listeners get this. It's good to point out that you can be in a relationship with your eating disorder self, the part that you go to help you cope with, distract from, deal with other problems. And actually, key 7 in the 8 Keys book is reach out to people rather than your eating disorder to get your needs met. And I think it's got to be the same in cults. You got to start finding other people to connect to, not just this one small group.
One of the main things is isolation, and all of the, an abuser is going to isolate you, a cult's going to isolate you, an eating disorder is going to isolate you, because how else can it maintain this control after the love bombing phase?
Well, that's the next one, illusion of control.
Yeah.
So there is that illusion, that thing where you said, it's so good when it's good. And I always tell people, really, you think that's in control? You're in a treatment center. How much control do you think you really have over your life? Or my favorite one, which is, put a cookie on the table, and to say someone with anorexia, they feel like they have willpower and self-discipline not to eat the cookie. Like my experience going to the Christmas party. And then I say, well, what would be harder for you? If you really wanted to show me you were in control, show me you can eat that cookie, Because, it is an illusion of control. It's not that I care if people eat cookies. What I care about is they have the choice.
Right.
They can eat it or not eat it, but it's up to them. They get to choose, not be obligated to have to do it one way or the other.
Exactly. And I do think an anxious personality type is more drawn to all of these dynamics. Not that it can't affect anyone, but, people who have a rather hot, fearful temperament to them, who are looking for answers. And suddenly it's
anxiety would do that.
Thank you. That's the word.
It gives you structure.
Yes.
I remember feeling like I could go through the day and I know what a good day was. A good day was
exactly
determined by following the eating disorder rules, and I have a good day. Or what the scale said would determine if I had a good or a bad day. It was so nice and easy and prescribed. I imagine a cult does that. I mean, told you what to wear and how to do your hair.
A perfect measurement.
And everything else.
Were you good today? I did it.
Yeah.
Was my abuser kind to me today? I did it. Did I lose a pound? I did it. And the experience of actually being human is much more complex than that. And how do you
nuanced
and how do you convince people that that's better when they're anxious? And it's hard, and it's something you have to start experiencing for yourself.
Okay, you're leading me into the next one, which is about getting out, about the resistance to leaving, about the push-pull, about the ambivalence, about the kind of like the abuser thing. Who will I be if I leave? Can you talk about that in both of them? Did they seem similar, or only looking back, can you see how they were?
Yes.
Well, it's about the resistance and ambivalence when you're trying to leave.
Yeah.
And do you have thoughts like, who am I going to be without this? Or fear or grief or loss? I mean, sometimes you have even though you have to get rid of it, there's a bit of a loss because it was so structured or useful in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, like we discussed, I think my second cult was the beauty industry, or people thinking that I was cute was very important to me because it was the first positive feedback I ever received.
The beauty myth.
The beauty myth.
Naomi Wolf's book.
Thank you. Yes. And, I got breast implants. I know you jotted down. I posed for Playboy in college. I used a different name, so nobody ever looked for it.
Yeah.
But I very much attached my identity to being cute, having fake boobs, and
is it enough yet?
Yeah, is it enough yet? And the answer was not yet. And so I really wanted to keep going until
not yet, not ever.
Not yet, not ever. But a part of my brain was like, but it could be, and I want to find that utopia. And so to be told, actually, that's not real. You aren't ever getting there. No one is, and they're not. It's impossible. It's a moving goalpost, just like cults.
Yeah, like you can never be thin enough.
You can never be it.
In an eating disorder, if you're thin enough, you die.
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly. And so
at least anorexia nervosa.
yes, and many others, as we've seen
Yeah.
so many people, we've lost so many people, but letting that self die was really hard for me because I was like, well, what else am I at the end of the day? And you and all of your infinite knowledge gave me The Power of Now, my favorite book. And
because it's helping people connect with something bigger
yes,
than this.
yes,
You know, that is so big. That way you were living was image over substance.
Yes.
Or the Joan Brumberg quote about we're teaching people to shape their bodies, not their souls,
Yeah, like soul, God, all of those concepts, very scary to me, very cult.
Yeah, I had to always make sure this is not a religion. You don't have to believe in any dogma.
Yeah. So just the relationships, the love, the very real beauty that is in life when you're living it. Once you find it, once something penetrates through the bullshit, you can't really go back. And when you're doing it incorrectly, when you are leaning on things that you know to be wrong, it doesn't hit the same anymore.
That's a good way to say it. It doesn't hit the same.
Yeah.
The eighth key in the book, the 8 keys to recovery from an eating disorder, the first 7 are what you're recovering from, and the 8th key is what you're recovering to. And it was interesting writing that book because I'm not a religious leader, but it isn't about religion. It's about a connection to meaning and purpose bigger than just this body, that we are, and I say this a lot. I'll probably say it several times throughout these episodes that, we're not a body that happens to have a soul. We're a soul that happens to have this home, happens to have this body called our earth suit, which I got from The Power of Now. That's the book where I first saw that.
Yeah, it is an earth suit. And it took me a long minute to find what my gift for the world is and what that looked like in my grown-up form. So if you don't know yet, keep exploring.
And don't you think it can shift? You have a gift.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's just
like
that
you're stuck in this one.
It's just that my gift was being cute. That's the only gift I knew about.
Now, and what do you say it is now?
Sharing my story, Yeah. Just
and interviewing people and helping them share their story.
Exactly.
And helping them see things they might not.
Precisely. Exactly. Thank you. Because my story, what I really mean by that is by telling what happened to me, I've now received way more people back saying, well, this is what happened to me. And then
opening the door.
It opened the door. And I can be like, oh, okay, my life has meaning. That was whatever. But it took a minute. And sometimes I'd be like, I don't really get why I'm here. And I had to sit with that through not having an eating disorder. And it wasn't easy all the time.
Well, that is the wounded healer thing that we both have.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean,
wounded healer club.
I mean, isn't that the best thing if we don't grow and learn from these things? I talk about how anorexia nervosa was definitely a dark night of the soul for me. And that's a great book also by Thomas More. But it was my biggest teacher.
Yes.
There are so many things. And I think a lot of people friends that had treatment and that we both know and still are connected with, a lot of people who came to Montanito said that was accelerated growth, because it can be, nobody wishes a dark night on anybody, but if you have a dark night, sift it for the gold that's in it.
And that's what resilience is.
And there's a lot of gold in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now you're able to do that and give back in a way where you have help other people sift through their own.
It's definitely the hope. And yeah, I just really have no finish to that sentence.
That's okay, because I have more to ask. I want to know what advice you would give people out there. If you think about this talk and think about people listening, there might be people who are struggling listening. There might be people who are trying to, like significant others, trying to understand them. There might be clinicians. We've said a lot of things. I'm looking at my notes while you come up with something to fill the blank. Look at my notes.
Yeah. So something to give people who are still going through it, like thoughts on that, you mean?
Yeah, like what's something you would say, like, not being too, like, what advice, what haven't we talked about that you want to say? Not, you got this, because what the heck does that mean? That's like, what? But more like something you would have them do or look for.
Well, number one, I would just want to offer like the absolute promise that life is better on the other side of it.
That's such a good point.
It really is.
Yeah. Do you know anybody who got to the other side and then wants to go back?
No, I don't. I
That's the
don't.
thing. Whoever comes to me and says, I want to go back there.
Never.
No, me neither.
Yeah.
45 years of treating people. That's a good one.
Yeah. So I think
Got
that
more?
so I think that was my first one. And then I'm also in AA. I'm so lucky. I have so many support groups to be a part of and problems to have. But I'm also in AA where they say take it one day at a time, and I don't think taking I have to be perfect for the rest of my life philosophy, I think that stressed me out a lot. Whereas I'm going to eat today like my healthy self wants me to. In the beginning, I could do that for a day, and I could keep repeating that.
Steps. Telling people you can take small steps. And
really,
you don't have to go from here to there.
Yeah.
I didn't know what recovered was. I didn't even know there was a word recovered. I got sick so long ago I always say in the ancient times, in the late 1960s.
And the 1900s.
No, not that bad. Around 1969, I probably first started dieting, and then by 1970, something like that. Anyway, it seems so long ago before, Anyway, but I didn't know what recovered was. But I did get to the point where I thought, I don't know what else there is, but I don't want to stay with this. So you don't have to know exactly where you're going.
Yeah.
To make it a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better.
Those small steps are so crucial. Like they are, what gets you there. You got to start somewhere. And even if it feels really scary or unpleasant, sitting with maybe not feeling completely in control, not feeling completely safe, because it's an illusion. And like getting out of that illusion of safety and control and whatever, and just sitting with kind of the messiness of life, which in turn will start to feel new and exciting and fresh and real and meaningful once you kind of switch back on. But it takes steps.
Yeah, and even when we say that, I realize how scary it is, because there are times when someone could step in and say, yeah, but you thought the eating disorder was that at first, or you thought the cult leader was that at first. And, I say that it takes trust to get better, but, in your podcast, that whole word about trust is like, be careful. Be careful who you trust. So, you know what I tell people sometimes? Don't judge that trust by how you see them treat you. Look how they're treating everybody. How are they treating everybody else? And not just their own family or their friends or other members of the group. How are they treating other people out in the world? That's an interesting, I have to think about that one.
No, let's
ponder that.
That's true, because at the very heart of cults are us versus them. So how are they treating us versus how are they treating them? Yeah. And how am I treating my eating disorder self versus how am I treating my healthy self?
Inherently not loving and healthy and soulful.
Not a green flag.
Yeah. I think one thing I would say to people, we talked about rules and how I have people write down the rules they follow. And one of the things that I'm going to do to listeners is provide a list so you can have access to this. I don't know, somehow the producers will do that for you, where you can I have a list in the book, 8 Keys to Recovery from an Eating Disorder. There's key 5 is talks a lot about the food and my ideas about food and weight and stuff like that. And I have someone write down all the rules that they follow. And you could even write down, this could apply to other things too, all the rules that you follow. But this list I want you to get is all the ways to challenge those rules. And I just want to read a few of them to ask yourself and answer. Don't just ask. How did I come up with this rule? Do I plan on following this forever? What happens if I break the rule? Is that based on facts or fears? How does this rule inhibit my relationships? How does it enhance them? Does everybody else have to follow this rule? And if not, why do I? Is there flexibility for like when you're sick or there's a a vacation or a holiday? What am I giving up by following this rule? And what am I gaining? There's a lot more, but there'll be a list and you can have access to that. So if you're still struggling with this, or you're a family member and you think you could share this, or a clinician with somebody, I suggest you ask them about it. We're about to wrap up, and there's two things I like to do at the end of the show. And I want to know, one, do you have a question for me?
I mean, so many.
So many. I thought you'd say, I know everything you have to say. I've known you for so long.
I mean, I'm wondering, like, what... you guys might have to edit this while I figure out the wording I want to put it in. I'm wondering what you saw help me the most that maybe I'm not even aware of that might also apply to other people like me.
I think acceptance was a big deal. Acceptance of your kind of like, you came to me with okay, I'm just going to say this. I dare you to help me. I dare you can help me. You just had that kind of sassy, I dare you attitude. And I think that a big thing that I do and that we did, and I think you have to find, is if you want to move forward with something, you need some acceptance about where you are at the moment.
Yeah.
Accepting it, someone really understanding it, non-judgment, and not having an agenda to change it. Like I hold up a mirror and say, well, I accept this, but here's what I see. You see that? You want to change it?
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. It's a good question.
I also wonder, like, what stood out to you the most in our conversations about cults and eating disorders, and if you have kind of changed your thinking on any of it, or if there's anything that stands out.
Well, the food one, you taught me that a lot of cults control people's foods, and I'm fascinated by that and what that does in terms of how restricting people changes their brain and restricting people's food. And once people do that, they get so far in following it. It's like, what's that called? Attachment to the perpetrator. You know, you get so weak and vulnerable. And when we talked about this a little bit on your show, when you're really restricted, you have a lot of OCD like behaviors.
Exactly.
So if you're indoctrinating somebody at the same time that you're kind of creating OCD, that's kind of a ripe combination.
Yeah.
I never knew that till I did the show with you.
Yeah. And I think you made I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
No.
I think you made a good point about that too, where it's like, and you're going to start seeing some quote unquote results from that, correct? Like if somebody starts restricting your food, you're going to be like, well, I'm changing. And, you know, it's completely arbitrary to actually changing at a soul level, but they hook you with like.
Well, plus the farther you get in something, and I find this about anything, I'm going to get tiny bit political for a second, but not go down the rabbit hole. You know, when you're supporting a candidate for a long time and you're vehement about it, the more you do to change your own behaviors or speak out or, you know, for that person, the harder it is to take it back. So the more you go down a road by, if they can get you to change your behaviors, and the longer you've been doing it, the harder it is to say, I was wrong all this time. I did all this and I was wrong. That's hard.
And they do it by design.
That takes a lot.
You know, so let's just use this example. It's very encouraged to speak out. And that's a design so that people, when they start to be like, wait a minute, they've already said it all. So these systems, including the systems of making us sick, are very built to grow and built to destroy. And
well, this is what you'll find in a lot of these feminist writers talking about suppressing women's desires. And you will also hear people, and this for other talks, but people talking about things like, you know, if it were this many men dying from eating disorders, we would have found more help and resources a long time ago and stuff like that. So there's a lot of feminist movement in the eating disorder world. Not that men don't have it. You know, I have someone scheduled right now in the lineup for interview who is a male with an eating disorder. And so it's not that they don't have it, but certainly the discrepancy is so big.
Yep.
Okay. The thing I like to end with, which is such a weird question, but, you know, I have this thing that I do called, how's your relationship with food like your relationship with people? And so I want you to answer that question. Think of your eating disorder and maybe how it was then and how it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think my eating disorder really peaked in college and it kind of mated with my alcoholism and created this,
The impulse.
yeah, it created this monster where I would go out with all of my friends, get super drunk, immediately leave, walk home, so dangerous, like by myself, drunk, get food by
Risky
myself,
behavior.
risky whiskey behavior. And
Oh my God.
and get food, eat it, purge, go to bed, right? Now, and so my relationship with people then is like, you're kind of my reason to leave the house, but then I'm ditching you and leaving you behind to go do what I really want to do, which is just purge and like get rid of all these icky feelings, and you don't really help me or mean anything to me.
So impulsive in relationships, impulsive with food, impulsive with...
Yes.
And this is my thing about temperament. We do have temperament. You are way more impulsive than me. I'm a little more controlled.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so,
And now?
I am very involved with the people that I'm going out with if I'm leaving the house for an evening, which PS, I hate leaving the house. Like I didn't know that about myself. My higher self is like reading with my cat and blah. Like I thought I was some sort of party animal. It's so insane. But let's say I do leave. It's very intentional, and like I would never leave before I hear everybody what's on their mind, what's going on with them, like wrapping it up in a bow. I want to leave feeling really full, both on food if we're eating and on their energy, and just feeling like we've connected. And like that former self is just like, what the hell is that?
Interesting. People ask me, how do people really change? That's a really good example of, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
So, but you would say you're more intentional about your relationships. You're more connected to your relationships. You get more out of your relationships. And that's the same with food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that nice?
It's so nice. It's so nice. And I would say that the people around me would be like, and do you actually bring something to the table? Instead of just ripping all the food off the table, eating it for yourself and throwing up. I'm actually bringing like a meaningful,
That's so good.
meaningful dynamic, hopefully,
But this is what's nice. And this is what I want listeners to take in. Look at that difference. How can someone go from that to this? And I've done it thousands of times with people for 45 years.
Yeah.
So thank you, Meagan, for being here and talking about this. It's a tricky situation. And I hope people got the parts out of it that point to the way out.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Point to the way out and grabbing somebody's hand to help them on the way out.
Oh, are we grabbing each
Yeah.
other's hands?
I'm grabbing your hand right now.
Yeah, because I think the end meaning, no, the end all be
Message.
all. Thank you.
I don't know what you're trying to say.
Is that it is better on the other side. I think that's the goal. So
That could be a good name for a podcast.
that really could be, and trusting
Better
the
on the
people
other side.
that it is better on the other side, and making that leap.
Hey everyone, thanks for dropping in. Thanks for listening. As I always say, I hope you got at least one nugget or gem out of it. And if you want to stay with me in this journey, just click on that subscribe button so you can come along for the ride next time.